A very special thank you for this special opportunity to also Alice Trinkle, our Docent Council Chair, Bianca Larson, a Community Speakers Chair, and Paula Rampey, who's provided remarkable coordination support for this program. So thank you all as we celebrate Therese, a very dear and revered friend who we so fondly remember today with her fellow docents and members of the Schoofs and Leponis families. Richard Schoofs, thank you so much for being here today. And it was really a very rare privilege to work with Therese and to learn from her. And Therese, I think, would have been particularly pleased that she's being honored through the sharing of these very inspiring works by the artist Yoong Bae, who we also celebrate with great pride. And his magnetic works left really an indelible impression on both Therese and me when the two of us first started to share these with the community through the Docent Speakers Program in 1997. And this is when the Yoong Bae exhibition was inaugurated at the Asian. So it's really such a great delight to remember Therese today with these works that brought us so much joy, inspiration, and many memorable moments. And our welcome to the Schoofs family and the Leponis family is made all the more special with the auspicious gracing of this occasion by members of the Yoong Bae family, his son and his daughter Sue, who are with us today, and who I had the occasion to meet 18 years ago, which was really such a rare privilege. Our warmest greetings and many special thanks. And I wanted to mention that, the special significance of these works, the Yoong Bae works that we're going to see, we acquired 21 works. And 18 of these are paintings, and 3 are silkscreen prints. And these really represent amongst the first works in a true modernist style that were acquired by the museum. So it is really a turning point in the for the Asian that in acquiring works by contemporary artists. And this magnanimous gift of all 21 works by Mrs. Yoong Bae were on display at the Asian in an exhibition which opened in December 1996 and ran through April 1997. And we're going to have our Korean curator could not be here today because I don't think she's in town, but she would have loved to be here and to let all of us know that there's going to be a mini exhibition of Yoong Bae's works for a great part of 2015, right from April to December 2015 in the Korean galleries. So this is really a happy coincidence in timing with today's theme and discussion. So now, turning to, we see Mrs. Yoong Bae in her Oakland home with the artist's print placed above the fireplace. With daughter Sue, accompanied by her then fiancé and a dear common friend from Korea, Oku Groja, who introduced us and arranged for me and my husband to visit the family for a private and intimate viewing of the artist's work. And this was really undoubtedly one of my highlight moments to have had this direct encounter in the artist's home, surrounded by his works and learning about the life of the artist, Yoong Bae. And so a very special thank you to Mrs. Bae, who could not be here today, and her son and her daughter for this very rare opportunity. And there's one more. So you can see that we are all just a touch younger, 18 years, by 18 years. So Oku and her husband, Glenn, are sadly no more with us. And she was a poet. And she was a common friend of both our family and the Yoong Bae family. And some of Oku's poetry echoes the theme of the artist. Both Oku and Yoong Bae shared an interest in Zen. One expressed it in painting, the other in poetry. And it was very impressive that the Bae family really has played host to a number of visiting artists and writers, especially from Korea, and their home became a gathering place for significant artistic exchange. Yoong Bae, a man of very gentle sensibilities, arrived in the US from Korea in 1974. He moved to the Bay Area and settled in the nearby Oakland Hills. And it was here in the Bay Area that the artist created a mature body of work integrating the lessons of both Western art and traditional Korean themes influenced by his background in Confucianism. So reflected, and we'll see how this is reflected in the use of traditional Korean paper, inks, and colors. And it is this second, more mature phase of Yoong Bae's work, which we will explore in some depth, reflecting the calm and harmonious disposition of an artist who comes to terms with his heritage, his history, and his place in the world. Dr. Kumja Kim, then curator, and Dr. Emily Sano, then director of the Asian Art Museum, were instrumental in the Yoong Bae acquisition. And Kumja Kim remarked, he looked at life in a contemplative manner and commented on it with quiet intelligence. Emily Sano referred to Yoong Bae works as provocative, inspirational, and singular. So when Yoong Bae left for Korea, so this is, the artist in his Oakland studio, in his home. And when he left for the US, he was really remembered in his home country as a technically skilled, accomplished, and a cultivated print artist who worked in a modernist international style. And his works were considered too contemporary in his native home. And he searched for a freer expression in the US. And this transition phase of relocating halfway around the globe was marked by the notion of travel in a very literal way for Yoong Bae. His art reflected maps, travel plans, journals, and itineraries suggestive of new paths and the necessity of charting a new course in a foreign world. So he has all these star maps, and we see clouds, and we see, if you notice, there is also calligraphic writing. And he integrates all of this and marking his transition. So there are star maps, there are astronomical charts, all placed among clouds of color, and they all depicted kind of a sort of a celestial escape and a chance to witness the problems of Korea, war, pollution, etc., from a different perspective. And throughout his nearly 20-year stay in the US, Yoong Bae embraced his concerns with great artistic maturity, using paper, ink, and colors as his avenue, and the brush as his vehicle, capturing brilliantly the idea of living simultaneously in two cultures. So now, these works are prints, because he was a print artist and a very modern international print artist when he comes. And interestingly, when he arrives in the US, and then his works really are, he uses very traditional medium. So prior to his California move in 1974, Yoong Bae first arrived as a student in New York in 1963 on a Ford Foundation grant. And he participated in the International Young Artists Program and was exposed to the new American painting of the 1960s, when the attention of the art world had shifted from Paris to New York and came to be centered around a group of artists, the abstract expressionists of the New York School. And Yoong Bae was quite influenced by the New York modern art movement, defined by a highly individual and expressionist art which revealed an inner consciousness and distinguished between the essential and the non-essential. So very briefly, let's look at some pioneering figures of the art movement in New York, whose works may have had some bearing and affinities with those of Yoong Bae. So here we have Mark Rothko, a radiant image, blue over orange, composed in 1956. And simple images of rectangular forms and glowing hues express an almost divine power. And notice how through layers, the colors glimmer as though radiating light from behind. And through the shimmering color, Rothko strove to generate light. In a rather distinctively native tradition, Yoong Bae's work emanates light using traditional ink and colors on printed Korean calligraphic text using a grid-like configuration frequently employed in pop art. And we will view this work in greater detail in the context of Yoong Bae's meditation series. And this is Barnett Newman, 1949, and he strove to achieve an art that would suggest the mysterious sublime, beams of light alternate with opaque blocks of color. And some called the works of Newman and Rothko the abstract sublime, a category which also fits the artist Yoong Bae. In a uniquely individualistic and expressionist art, Yoong Bae strove to probe essence through an ingenious, minimalist, and sublime art representing a profound vision and his mastery over ink and brush, which he acquired as a trained calligrapher in Korea. And notice all these touches. Now we're going to see that throughout, the touches of light emanating from his Mound here, and we will be again exploring the artist's Mound series through several of his works. Now, in a reverse scenario, there were renowned Western artists whose work approximated calligraphic painting. And here we have Mark Tobey, and he called this painting idiom white writing. Remember in the Chinese calligraphic exhibition, we had one of the works here by Mark Tobey from the SF MoMA collection. And he called his painting idiom white writing, and the white lines inspired by the tradition of calligraphy in China and Japan, places he was familiar with through his travels. Now here the line is transformed from its traditional role of describing and defining shapes to creating a web of movement, stretching out into open space without beginning or end. Franz Klein, and his works look almost calligraphic. Brush drawings of black paint on paper look like Oriental characters. And in a somewhat different vein, but also calligraphic, is a late work by Georgia O'Keeffe, a pioneering figure in American modern art. And this is the winter road as seen from her eastern window when she lived on a hilltop in a Spanish-American village. Almost a reflection on the nature of space, time, and infinity. O'Keeffe developed this fluency of the brush through her studies of Chinese and Japanese painting and calligraphy. And lastly, Isamu Noguchi, a figure who, like Yoong Bae, drew continually from two cultural heritages, and he was, a Japanese-American sculptor and designer. This is his sunken garden at the Chase Manhattan Bank Plaza in New York City. He was inspired by Zen gardens. And in Zen, garden is a space which one may enter for quiet reflection. And this is Noguchi's modern-day version of the dry rock gardens in Japan. He levitates his rocks as though floating in a cosmic space, creating the illusion of space. Japan also gave Noguchi a new sense of time, that to move forward also means to go back and draw a connectedness with the past. Thus, he was deeply drawn to heart stone, a most time-enduring substance, and romancing the stone became his passion. Noguchi offers a vision of space and time, which also unfolds in Yoong Bae's works. Now, clearly, all these modern artists had experienced their horizons beyond the notion of traditional arts, and what they shared in common was a quest, a search for authentic expression. And in their cosmopolitanism, these artists overflowed their national boundaries to reach for a global vision. So not only did American artists absorb Far Eastern principles, but also significant contributors to modern art in New York were immigrants, like Yoong Bae. Mark Rothko was a Russian, Achille Gorky, a Turkish Armenian, and Willem de Kooning, a Dutch. So as a result, the language of modern art following World War II becomes universal, drawing both the West and East in its fold. And what it looked for was an openness. So now let's immerse ourselves in Yoong Bae and his move to the US becomes a starting point for a new pictorial vision, and it was clearly sparked by an inward journey. So remember now, he was a print artist when he arrived here, and now he takes almost exclusively to painting. So what we're going to see in the next few slides is a series called The Poetry of Space. And this was executed by the artist between 1980 and 1983. And so now described as a poetry of space, this was executed between 1980 and 83, and each composition represents soft, broken, horizontal lines punctuated by space with a band of color. He never fails to inject, a kind of a sort of a radiant light. Sometimes you have to look for it, but he almost all his works have a light that emanates from his works. Here is another one. All of the Poetry of Space series are in our collection. To these eloquent images, we can give what meaning we want to, but it seems as though the artist might be exploring life in a continuum of space and time, bathed in a sort of divine light. And the technique he employs to create this vision is rather unique. So he first layers the flat backing with Korean mulberry paper, and then moistening this top sheet, he scrapes paper away with his fingernails to create ridges and furrows, so it has a texture, giving the works a sculptural quality. And he applies soft washes of ink or light color on the surface, and then paints a bright line of color, generating a calm texture. So you see, these paintings have a poetic touch. He treats space like lingering waves, spreading infinitely, sounding out a melody. There is a flowing, yet regulated rhythm. This poetic rhythm is also carried through in a vertical composition in the same series, and I think this is on view currently. And yet another one. Now in this work, the artist created a 6-foot-long paperwork in the same vertical style and mounted it on a wooden armature. And then the artist painted the top of the work with blue, and creating a kind of a sense of a waterfall, the illusion of a waterfall. Some of these works, this is also in our collection, and it has been displayed here. But they have been displayed either singly or in two, so we don't see them as a series all the time. Here, in a soft golden wash, the surface glitters like water catching light. It reminds one of Monet's water lily paintings. Like Yoong Bae's spacious compositions, Monet, too, was seeking a glimpse of the divine. Immersed in a universe of light and water, he repeatedly approached the same motif with different nuances of light, capturing moments of emerging and disappearing light. And these works reflect an internal vision. Now we're going to see a different series, and it's called The Song of the Turtle. He also called it the Cougar series. So in the Song of the Turtle or the Cougar series, some are dense compositions, while others are rather sparse. And in this second series of paintings, the artist creates mounds entirely of ink and water, using the tools of traditional calligraphy and using the boneless technique. So that is, without a firm outline, he creates these hazy halos around mounds. See? It's very interesting. Now, he is, of course, an extremely, Yoong Bae was a trained calligrapher, as was his father, who headed a Confucian academy. So I believe that every day after school, he would go to the academy, and he was a very skilled calligrapher. And he hasn't used this technique while in Korea when he was a print artist, but when he comes to the United States, this becomes very prominent in his works. And here is a more spacious composition. And notice the touch of light that he always introduces. Yet another one. Gets more spacious. So what vision is he trying to pursue or express? Yet another one. Clearly, it is the pauses, the intervals, the empty spaces which define the composition, as though the authentic language is one of absence, silence, and void. And from this nothingness or void arise the barest outlines. So like a world born out of void, these mound-like forms float in space with weightlessness and ease. Now what is interesting is that these minimalist works of ink, brush, and water also remind us of the aesthetics of Asian art, where everything is pared down to its essence. So in this is a familiar work for all of us, the Libo chanting a poem. It's a 13th century work. And in this 13th century Chinese painting by Liang Kai, it is the void which slowly gives form and personality to the Tang poet Libo, like a silhouette arising out of nothingness, with just a hint of the robe, a hint of the shoes, just a hint. And a few facial characteristics. The artist captures a quality of concentration and unity, that ecstatic moment which may bring a sudden awakening. So the same ideas of minimalism and significance of void are exploited here with marvelous effect in the 13th century. And this is one of the great Chan paintings. Again, we are familiar with this, another great work, and Chan is the Chinese equivalent of Zen. It is these Chan paintings of the southern Sung period in China which inspired Zen works in Japan. So another great Chan painting of the 6 persimmons was painted by the priest Muchi in the 13th century again, a small painting but charged with spontaneity. So much like Yoong Bae's mounds, it could be analyzed bit by bit in terms of spaces. But the key to its meaning lies in its meditative potential, the fact that we can suddenly realize truth in a group of everyday objects. So its value lies not in what we see, but in stirring the imagination and in awakening us to the mysteries of the hidden and the unseen world. Maybe Yoong Bae has a similar message. The artist captures the mysterious power of simple things, basic in form, direct and engaging. The mounds, repeated a number of times, spark a meditative quality and a deeper response in the viewers. So our 20th century contemporary artist is pursuing a similar reduction and concentration that characterized 13th century works. Now, both the poetry of space and the Kuga or Mound series we saw can be seen as a progression. First, there were just ripples of ink and water, which slowly gave rise to hazy mounds in his second series. And here we see these hazy mounds as almost cave-like settings. All culminating in supreme joy as human presence becomes one with the primordial natural landscapes. Now you have to look for these human silhouettes. So now he introduces figures. So the mounds can now be visualized as cave-like settings inhabited by human figures. Again, the theme is one of meditation, which evokes qualities of serenity, tranquility, and a final awakening. And the figures seek salvation bathed in a rainbow of light, a picture of joy, hope, and promise. Oh. Now here, this is again, now we are into his meditation series where we see the silhouettes and the figures. And he reproduces these human silhouettes in meditation in a variety of settings. A composition of stacked houses, each with a figure facing a wall. And they're placed either singly or in twos or in threes, close in proximity, yet isolated by contemporary living. Each expressing a solitude which is all the more enhanced when human beings reside so close to each other in urban dwellings. So it is a social commentary on the uprooted and hurried condition of modern city life which create such isolation. You see here? What is happening here? Here we have become mere numbers, and the line in red seems to represent figures racing to an unknown destination, emphasizing the need for contemplation and quiet reflection in today's urban environment, a need to integrate timeless concerns with everyday realities through contemplation. And this is a work in the Yoong Bae home, and you can see the line in red just, is a very prominent red, and communicates a really strong message. A similar composition of stacked homes and a racing line in red is displayed in our own collection at the Asian. And this was on view not too long ago. Now, there are two vertical compositions in this series, and a flame arises out of the top of one, and we're going to see the other one bellows smoke. And if we look carefully, there are seated meditation figures. You have to look for them. See, there are two of them here, and then there are two seated together here, and there is one single one here, and there is one seated on top. And then in the next one, now these two are silk screen prints. They're not paintings. The others were all paintings. Now in this next composition, we see a flying figure leaping through smoke, while others are seated below. So, So see these two, and then there's one here, and this one is leaping out. So the contemporary man caught in a technological race threatens the world with pollution and industrial mechanization. And so Yoong Bae advocates a pause through his meditations, a look at the past to recapture an era of peace and serenity. So there seems to be a longing for a simple life of the past. Now what do we have here? A series of images. And this is not a print, this is a painting, with the profile of a man seated in meditation, placed side by side. The solitary uniqueness of each figure is enhanced by repetition. Now, Yoong Bae, an established print artist, was also familiar with print techniques employed in pop art. So these pop artists employed pictorial motifs, and in serial images, they used very familiar subjects as movie stars and everyday objects as Coke bottles and soup cans. And you notice this is Andy Warhol's Marilyn Monroe illustration, a diptych created in 1962. Now, it's a mechanical reproduction of photographic images using a silkscreen process. And in such endless repetitions, we see how common subjects assume an uncommon presence. We hardly see the same image over and over because it becomes psychologically layered and assumes a new meaning. This, for example, is a moving meditation on fame versus obscurity, and public admiration versus loneliness. The left section reveals a bright and glamorous media image of Marilyn Monroe worshipped by the public. And the right panel shifts to somber blacks and grays. And the image varies from dark and obscure to a faint ghost-like one. So despite her presence in 50 images, Warhol creates such a powerful hallucination that we wonder if she existed at all. Now, Yoong Bae, unlike Warhol and other contemporaries, as Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, did not glorify pop culture. Instead, he used the commercial silkscreen printing techniques and grid configurations employed by pop artists to preserve a unique native heritage. So this again is from the meditation series and in our collection. So here multiple images are painted on a page from a Korean philosophical text. So the background has, when one notices closely, has writing, and it's a philosophical text, or calligraphic text. And each figure separate and confined in its own space, as you can see. So the artist may be referring here to a kind of an archetypal loneliness, basic to human existence, which is distinct from literal isolation. And this is a yearning for something beyond the material world, conveyed through silence and solitude. These figures seem to represent a celebration of human spiritual values guided by a higher light. And in the native Asian tradition, they convey a sense that peace and salvation lie in meditation. Look at that beautiful vermilion red. Right. It's just amazing. Now, this is a tanka. It's a 19th century tanka which was displayed in the Mongolian exhibition at the Asian Art Museum a year prior to the Yoong Bae exhibition. And we noticed that the repetition of motifs to capture the sacred spirit is an age-old Asian characteristic. In Buddhism, it is associated with the idea of accumulating merit, and images are painted over and over in quest for enlightenment. So this tanka has appeared in the Mongolian exhibit, and tankas are religious paintings characteristic of Tibet and also popular in Nepal and Mongolia. The Buddha Shakyamuni sits in meditation at the center, surrounded by 335 smaller Buddha images. Each one is a Buddha image here. It's a beautiful work. And used in prayer and as meditation tools, such tankas with multiple images increase the potency of the Buddha's power. So not only the repetition of motifs is Asian in character, but the meditative theme, so central to Yoong Bae's work, is once again drawn from native heritage. Some of the world's finest images of the meditating Buddha come from Korea. Enshrined in a man-made grotto called Sokuram, a perfect image of the Shakyamuni Buddha is seated in meditation at the center of the rotunda. And images of bodhisattvas and disciples of the Buddha, which we can't see, are carved along the wall. Dated 8th century, the image is a culmination of Korean sculpture, a superb rendering of the face and with an ethereal smile and a magnificent lifelike body clothed in a thin robe. So this Sokuram image is a sculptural masterpiece and a supreme embodiment of the religious spirit of the time. Shila artisans, this is the meditating Maitreya, 6th, 7th century Shila, They provide us with some of the most moving images of the meditating Maitreya. Maitreya is the future Buddha to come. And this is a detail of a gilt bronze image of Maitreya dated 6th, 7th century and now in the National Museum collection in Seoul. The downcast eyes, the archaic smile, and the tranquil expression of the face all have a strong air of spirituality. And a common image from Korea of recent times, the silhouette of a man seated in meditation like Yoong Bae's figure. So we see how this meditating image is drawn from a long Korean tradition. So re-examining Yoong Bae's painting, we can almost slowly ascend the work like a Chinese landscape painting, reading the work from bottom up. We see a repetition of the same motif, row after row after row. And the composition begins to exert a spiritual power as the figure in silhouette slowly fades out of existence, transformed into pure spirit, becoming one with the universe. And arriving at such a state of no self is the ultimate Zen ideal. Also, from the same meditation series is a rather powerful and colorful expression from his later years. Here, a small meditating figure. You can see how he is completely overshadowed by a large, ominous-looking bird. We see a quality of surrender and humility, a reminder of man's insignificance in the face of nature. And this was painted shortly before his death and in the year of his death. So it almost proclaims the idea of the acceptance of fate with a sense of quiet composure. The last series he painted was entitled Road to Master series. Now, you notice how in his earlier works there's very little use of color. And now, towards the end of his life, he begins to inject some color in his works. The artist turned to horses and riders in this Road to Master series. And this particular work was painted in 1984, but most of the other works in the Road to Master series were painted in his final years. That's between 90 and 1992. So the figures here ride and trail behind a horse figure as though contemplating the path to enlightenment, a metaphor for a liberating journey to a higher realm. Now, this work hangs in their home and is a very large work, and we could hardly, we could not capture the full scope of this work, but we have it almost there, and almost 90%, but not fully. And thanks to my husband, he was helping with the photographs, and we tried very hard, and we got almost all of it. So this represents among his very last works painted just prior to his death in 1992, and it was painted in Korea, where Yoong Bae spent nearly half of his time in later years and was shipped to his Oakland home after his death. And unlike most of his other works, we see the urge to use strong color, and notice how these figures are all illumined and almost bathed by a rainbow of light, expressing the joy of transcendence. And here life is seen as a journey in space, a journey in time, a journey to an awakened realm, guided by a brightly lit rainbow. And he says here, the message from rainbow. And Mrs. Yoong Bae was explaining, how auspicious the rainbow, the symbol and the metaphor of the rainbow was for the two of them. In all their groundbreaking moments, the couple witnessed a rainbow in the sky. And so the rainbow was something that was very consciously embedded in Yoong Bae's memory. And this is almost as though the light from outside slowly reveals the light within. metaphors for passing beyond, and a longing for transcendence. The light our artist craved for was one of revelation, one that illumines, and one that evokes a reverent silence. These works are highly spiritual. However, they're not associated with any specific religion, Buddhist, Christian, or Confucian. Rather, in a fusion of all religions, they refer to an awakened journey open to all, directed to any path of salvation. This is 1992 again, in his final year. Now, also in these two angels, the two angels figures that we see are in our collection, and he also painted these winged figures that look like angels. And so this is one, and this is the other, and I think we are probably going to see these works when the mini exhibition comes along. So what do we see? So with a surging approach to his work, with a persistent quest and a thirst for essence, the artist expressed his meditations in both abstract and figurative works. So he starts with the abstract in the 1980s when he arrives here, after he arrives here in 1974, and then slowly he introduces the figurative, where we see these silhouettes, and then he introduces touches of colors in his final years. And his was an unending spiritual voyage. So he expresses meditations in both abstract and figurative works. And his was, I would say, an unending spiritual voyage between two cultures, an experience far beyond one of just relocating on the map. Rather, it was the experience of being transposed and of being displaced in time and place, of having to leave something very dear behind, and of trying to arrive at a new equilibrium. And he was unmistakably inspired by his native past and by a keen awareness of tradition, which he combined with contemporary approaches and modern techniques to create a highly imaginative art. And in this process, the artist clearly journeys beyond the individual in leading us to themes of universal significance. And in his late works, again 1990 to 1992, we also see the emergence of three-dimensional sculptures. And there's little to comment on here. It's quiet, meditative, self-evident. This is called Wish, and you see the figure. Again, we have that touch of light, and he is in a prayerful gesture. And another, invoking the idea of ascent. And we will rest here for a reflective moment. And they say that true art is one. Again, notice here, there is again a touch of light here, never fails to. And so there are not that many sculptures that I have seen in his catalogs, but there are half a dozen. And these later ones have this idea of ascent. There are ladders in a couple and steps in this one. And so the meditative figure is, ascends as though he ascends the hilltop or ascends the steps, and is perched on top in a very serene setting. And they say that true art is one where the experience generated by the artist is transmitted to the onlooker. So serene, calm, and imbued with beauty, Yoong Bae works kindle an awakening. Thank you.